We will be bringing theater classes back to the college for the first time in a decade. So we've been lucky because we wouldn't have been able to do this without the incredible talent, without the genius of the person that we hired to be our creative director. Let me tell you a little bit about his background. He really got started in Hollywood by writing for the show In Living Color, which some of you are probably too young to even remember. But trust me, it was one of the funniest television shows ever. When he got tired of that, oh, and by the way, while he was there, he did this little thing on the side. He wrote Jennifer Lopez the very first monologue that she ever performed. He then went on and wrote for Mad TV for a few years after that. And then decided, well, that wasn't enough, so he needed to start writing movies. And his biggest hit was the movie Nothing Like the Holidays with John Leguizamo and Deborah Messing. It's an outstanding film. Just this year, he received an award from the International Latino Book Association for the most inspirational book, and has been touring around the country, not only doing talks about the book, but he created right here on this stage last December a one-man comedic show interpretation of that book, which has now been traveling all over the country. So we really have been lucky to bring this individual into this community because of his knowledge, his contacts, his experience, and his great talent. He really is one of the funniest people you'll ever meet. I love doing these events just to listen to what he's going to come up with as part of his introduction. So that is my opportunity to introduce to you our creative director, my good friend, Mr. Rick Najera.
This is the Latino Thought Maker Series, and I'm glad to see we have a good audience tonight. This is great. November 20th, we have Eastside Morales here. You guys know Eastside Morales from La Bamba and such stories. This Latino Thought Makers really is talking with artists, especially Latino audience, about their process, what they do. And Alex, you want to come on out here? This is Alex Rivera, the director. What we like to do, we're going to show you this film right now. It's called Sleep Dealer, and I think it was way ahead of its time. Would you say that's correct?
Time's right, sure.
Time's right. Oxnard is 70% Latino, so that means this is the home for Latino thought makers. It's a place where we celebrate our culture, we celebrate the people that bring the arts, and we ask the right questions. So afterwards, there are question and answer. We're sitting up here and we're talking as artists about the process of what made this film. And it's seldom that you actually have the director at a movie and really ask those questions. So afterwards, I encourage you to ask some questions, and hopefully, it's 90 minutes, right? It's a 90-minute film. Alice and I will be on the stage talking, and so think about what questions you might want to ask, okay? So, thank you very much for having us. Thank you, Oxnard, Latino Thought Makers. Enjoy Sleep Dealer. Oh, you have something to say?
Oh, I just want to say it's great to be here in Oxnard. Some of my favorite thought makers, artists, creative voices are from Oxnard. Author Michelle Serros is a friend, and I'm a fan of her work. And Los Brothers Hernandez, Jaime and Gilbert, authors of Love and Rockets. If you don't know their work, you got to check them out. They're geniuses, born and bred here in Oxnard. It's great to be here. It's an honor. And this is Latino science fiction, the first futuristic film set south of the border. I hope you enjoyed it, and I really look forward to connecting and hearing your thoughts after the show. Thank you.
And last time we had Quetzal, who won a Grammy Award, and they also are from Oxnard. So not only are we going to bring Hollywood here, we're going to celebrate the artists in Oxnard who are working in Hollywood as well.
The company that bought it and took it out to market went out of business, and we almost lost it, and so it got relaunched. We had to get the rights back. It was a big struggle, but we relaunched it this year in 2014. So now it's out on iTunes and Amazon and blah, blah, blah.
How's it doing?
It's doing okay. I mean, it's hard to relaunch a film. It's hard to launch a film at all in the market right now. It's difficult, but it's doing well. And it's been in venues like this, in colleges and universities around the country. It's always playing. So I feel like it's found its home. It's like a cult film.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it's refreshing what it's talking about. When you see the first part, they dam up the Colorado River. Some version. But the Colorado River used to flow into Mexico.
And, okay, wow, there came God voice. Wow. So,
It's all theater training.
that's all theater training. This is not the microphone. It's me actually speaking with my theater voice to the back of the room. So in the film came out in 2008, then re-released again, and now the rights have come back to you. It's now your film, which is a great thing. And I remember when I had seen it, I think we met at some Sundance event or something like that, and I was, it's strange how the Latino filmmaking works. Because right now there's a TV show out called Jane the Virgin with Gina Rodriguez, who's a great actress and great. She did a film called Philly Brown that came out before Jane the Virgin. Now she's everywhere. So if they would have re-released Philly Brown, it would have a better chance of really getting an audience. So a lot of times with us, the misstep of getting the filmmaker like yourself out to a wider audience and then let the grassroots, the tipping point where you say, I love this film, I really want to support Alex and his other work, and see this, because this film is so ahead of its time. You're talking drones, you're talking drone strikes, you're talking all those things, and a great deep social area. Some of the messages you say, like, America came up with a good plan. Use the Latino labor, but they don't have to live here, which is a radical thought. What was your thought of that?
Well, I guess one.
Straight up.
Yeah, okay, good. One general reflection on the film kind of being ahead of its time in terms of the thinking about technology is that, just a few hours south of here, of course, is the border. A lot of our families have connections to that, to crossing at some point, that experience. But if you look at technology, the border is kind of a time machine. And what I mean by that is, if the technology that we see in the airport now, the backscatter technology, where you put your arms up and get zzz, zzz, and they scan you in the airport. We've been seeing that in airports maybe for a few years, but that was being deployed on the U.S.-Mexico border in 2002. Right after 9/11, they rolled that out on the border. Drones, we're hearing about drones all the time now, but they've been on the border now they came to the border in around 2005. So drones were there almost 10 years ago. Because our country sees it as a security zone, it's a place where if you look at it, you can see the future. Because all the technology that will be rolled out in general across the country is being experimented there first. And so it was a kind of blessing and a curse, because I'm interested in the border, tuned into it. You could see the drones coming when I made the film, but people weren't talking about them yet.
Yeah,
And it takes another couple of years for it to become an American issue across the country, but it was already a border issue.
We're going to share a mic. That's the beautiful artistic thing right now. So this is also power, so you can't talk unless I hand this to it. So, I grew up on the border. I grew up in San Diego. I grew up 15 miles from the border. And I noticed the border issues way back then. My cousin was second in command of customs, and they would always they'd come up with things like, on border patrol agents, there's sensors, and if you trip a sensor, it shows there's movement. So it's very tech savvy, and it is amazing. That's why when I was watching it, I was like really brought back to what the border is. And one of the things I always said was the border is something we share, not actually something that separates us. But in San Diego, where I grew up, there was a certain separation. And oddly, my grandfather had a place in Tijuana, we had here, and one of the things, great, I'm trying to fix that one. Thank you. So one of the things I saw growing up, there's always a weird thing. Like here's a joke for you. What's the best neighborhood in Tijuana? San Diego. That's what they would say. They would actually say it's one of those jokes. And they would, there were a lot of cross-border artists and joking, and I worked with Culture Clash and things like that. But it's an amazing artistic area too. Tell me a little something about that, what you ran into.
Well, the artists have been working in that space, since it was first defined, but in recent years, Guillermo Gomez Peña, Taller de Arte Fronterizo, I think it was, or
Nortec and music.
Yeah, and Nortec, but there's always been a community artists working in that zone. If people are interested in seeing some of that work, you can look up an arts festival called Insight, INSITE. But they were a border arts triennial, so every 3 years they would invite artists from around the world and also work with local artists to put on an exhibition of border art. And I did a work there in 2005, and that was the year they also shot a human cannonball across the border. I don't know if people have seen that, and it's just kind of stunning where they had an artist shoot himself in the air over the border. That year in 2005, I did a project I called the Low Drone. Again, this is almost 10 years ago, but you could see the drones coming, and I was thinking, well, what would a Latino drone look like? We know that the Border Patrol is going to have their drones, the police will have their drones. What would the drone of the people look like? And so we did this project.
What'd you come up with?
Well, we came up with a we pimped a drone. We did it with we called it the Low Drone. It was sort of lowrider meets drone, and it had gold paint and candy chromed motors, and it actually flew.
Was there a luchador running it?
No, just me. I'm the luchador in that case. No, but I was on the ground, but in Mexico, right? And so we launched it from Mexico, and it jumped over the border back and forth. And the Border Patrol, they came up and just stared at it, they were completely stunned by it. But it was so playful. It was purple and gold and just jumping over the border back and forth. But it was just an idea that, technology doesn't need to be about surveillance and violence. It can be about freedom. It can be about connection. You're saying the border doesn't have to be about separation. It can be about connection. That's what this little machine represented. But that was done for Insight. If you look there, there's just this treasure trove of kind of incredible border art.
And you shot where the border fence actually goes into the ocean, and one of the most amazing things I ever saw was I saw the border fence going deep into the ocean, and I saw a dolphin just go over it. And to me, that was the most amazing thing. I said, and it was sunset, and I went, did anyone but me see that? It was, and the border, it's a very magical place in a weird way. It's you go to the border fence, and you see families coming, and there's a park there, and they'd bring their photo albums. They couldn't cross the border, but they'd be across the fence, they'd show each other their photo albums. And you would see, growing up in San Diego, you would see such a change of that border, and then you see the lights of San Diego, which is such a rich city. And there's huge contrast, and I think as an artist, you look at that, and that's what sparks this kind of world.
It's when I show the film, often people come up to me and say, your visual effects were good, but the visual effect I liked the best was that image of the wall going into the water. That looked really real. Yeah, it's real. That's your tax dollars at work. They built this crazy sculpture. I mean, it's like
It's corrugated metal. It's like the metal from... it's actually used from Vietnam and different wars. It's metal that they put on landing strips. So like Diego Garcia, places like that, they take this corrugated metal, they lay it down. So the border wall is actually a piece of military history in a strange way. And that area right there is people have died trying to swim around the wall because it's horrible riptides. So on the other side of the wall, you have tiny crosses for the Mexicans who died trying to swim across. So you really see this amazing contrast, and also as Latinos, we tend to laugh at the tragedy. This is how we survive. We laugh. And how do you use humor? Do you use humor in your work?
I try to. This film was intended to actually be more funny. One of my inspirations in terms of science fiction is Terry Gilliam's Brazil, which is a film not set in Brazil but set in London, but slightly confusing. But that's a film that is a portrait of fascism, but it's wildly funny. It's just
Terry Gilliam, Monty Python, and that work.
And it's like a trip to the DMV from hell, It's just things that were so bad, it's just absurd. So I was hoping that this film would have this kind of sense of weirdness and wonder, where the world that this kid, Memo Cruz, my main character, he's kind of discovering this world, and even though it makes sense, like you can understand from a business point of view, okay, we're gonna have workers control these robots, and they'll be far away, we'll pay them a low wage, and they can do work.
Yeah.
It makes sense, but it's also absurd and twisted. And so it was supposed to have a little bit more of that humor. You see it in the call booth, when he sends money, and then there's like the little running dollar signs, and, you know, there's a couple jokes in there, but the film, because of the way we shot it, and some other decisions, it took on more of a darkness. It has more of a darkness.
Well, I did a film with Uriah Rosmendi and Sergio Rao called Day Without a Mexican, and I came out as like a comedy consultant, and it was absurd. You know, at one point someone was looking at UFOs and they were you know, Mexican hats, and people were talking about different stuff like that, but it had that dark comedic edge that really the border has.
That's right. I mean, I think you know, your comment that Latinos, we deal with hardship through laughter is absolutely, absolutely true. And a lot of times the films that are done about immigration, they don't have that. And I think that's something that artists inside our community, we know, because we've seen our family members going through incredible hardship and coming at it with a great sense of humor. It's kind of one of the only weapons that we have that can't be taken away, is our ability to just...
Well, it's almost the image of that little mouse about to be picked up by the eagle and he's flipping him off. And that's kind of that, you know, attitude almost on the border. Now, what would you say would be something you didn't expect to find at the border that you found in this film?
Well, I guess number one, just that the landscapes there, it's just how close and how far we are. You know, that town where where Memo lives on the border, the shanty town, you know, again, that's not something we built, there it is. And it's literally 5 feet from the border. So you have California here, Mexico right there, and there's this shanty town. So it's very close physically, but visually a world away. But on top of that, you talk to the people who are living there, and you think these must be folks who have no job, or folks who are in a great, really dire straits. But actually the people who live there are building our TV sets. You know, you talk to them and you see their uniforms. They're coming home from working for Samsung or for Sony. So they're very close in that sense as well, that it's things that we have intimate relationships with. Our computers, our TVs, our cell phones, all the stuff that we have around us is built right there, so close, and yet in a world so far away. You know, and that's what was mind-bending, is you can just take pictures of that reality and show it, and it looks like Mad Max. It looks like science fiction to people who haven't been there.
Well, the Mackling drug camps are really huge in Tijuana, in that area, and it is an industrial future we're looking at. And I think sometimes we're not educating our people in science. But you know, people don't realize there were more engineers graduating in Mexico than in Germany this year. More. So there are a great deal of technological advances in Mexico that people aren't seeing, and you know, with Latinos here, of course. I think you bring up a lot of that aspect. At the same time, you bring up the social aspect of, we love your work, we don't just necessarily want you here. And that's a very radical statement in a sci-fi film.
Yeah. And I guess a couple things. I think science fiction is very powerful in its what it does in terms of opening up the possibilities for metaphors. Science fiction is always works that way. We think about 1984. You know, in that novel, Orwell is of course kind of looking towards the future, but he's talking about his present through this future. So the science fiction always lets you reflect on the present. You know.
Yeah. Now, I want to open up questions for the audience, because you saw the film, and this is a rare opportunity to talk to the creator of the movie and ask any questions. So, if there's any questions, feel free to ask. Okay, you right there. Criticism against the film at all?
Criticism? I mean, not, you know, I thought politically it would get more attacked, but again, I think science fiction is this space where you can say these kinds of critical things, and it's not viewed as political speech because you're talking about the future somehow. So
yeah,
that's
a good point. It's like comedy people, you can get away more with making someone laugh and then telling something to them than, any other genre. And I think science fiction is the other one, because they're saying it's in the future, it's not there, it's not now.
You can't fact check it.
Yeah, but it's actually now. That's the great thing about this movie, it actually is now.
And what I was going to say about that, your earlier comment about that idea of the work without the workers is just that I think it's a kind of, to me, a timeless dynamic in this country. We could maybe talk about other parts of the world, but just to speak about this country for a second, that has somehow always had a system for the people who do the most essential work, food, taking care of kids, basic survival stuff. The people that do that work are somehow also shut out. And that's something that connects our community to the African American community, to the Asian community in this part of the country. And there's somehow always been the people that build the railroads are the ones that, you can't own land, or you can't, it's like this sort of very strange dynamic that the folks doing the most essential work, we don't want them, let's kind of shut them out somehow of participating. And it's
Well, the Chinese built the railroads.
Exactly, yes.
But at the same time, the Border Patrol originally was started to stop the Chinese from coming in from Mexico. That was because they were, working on borders and working on the railroads, and yet we needed them.
And so, when I had this kind of dream, I had this like a strange dream where I was thinking about the internet and this idea of a global village and this idea of a world with no borders. It's how we talk about the internet. It's borderless, it's a global village. And the fact that the border wall is being built at the same time. In the 1990s is when they started building the wall. In the 1990s is when the internet explodes. Well, how is it that we're going to have a borderless world? We're building these big walls. What is that? And so I had this kind of image of my family telecommuting to America, coming over the internet, crossing that wall digitally. And then I said, wait a second, it's like a continuity. I was talking to Lalo Alcaraz from La Cucaracha, right? And he said, it's like the Bracero program. And I was like, but this is Cybracero, the Cyber Bracero program. And it just was like a key turn in my mind, like that position of being and not being that America has kept workers in one way or another. Like, we want you, we need you, do our essential stuff. When it's time to vote, no, you can't do that.
Well,
it's
kind of like a rich man coming back to his house and looking and he sees a gardener and goes, I thought the lawn just looked like this naturally. What's he doing here? It's like, it doesn't work that way. We have to be here. We have to do those things. Another question.
Story and the concept, and I worked with a friend, a co-writer named David Reicher, who's a filmmaker. He made a film called La Ciudad in the 1990s. He just did a film called Dirty Wars last year, which was nominated for an Academy Award. So he worked with me on the screenplay as well. So
one more question. How long did it take from the screenplay to the actual production?
Well, the first draft of the screenplay was probably done in around the year 2000, like a while. And then we kept working on it over and over again until we shot it in 2006. During this about 6 years, but I'm not working every day, you know what I mean? Like, it takes me to push and then have to go make a living or come back to it, or I want to make another film, come back, so, but it took about 6 years of development until we got financed.
The average film, they say, takes about 7 years to make. That's normal. I mean, a lot of people, films some take decades. I mean, it's a very odd business. And you'll see some films being made. I wrote a film called Nothing Like the Holidays, and it went into production within a year after I wrote it. And that's unheard of. It's just lucky. But that company went bankrupt too. So then you have bankrupt companies, and that you go into cyber development hell kind of thing, where you know who owns this, who doesn't own it. I think even Mind Entertainment, which was one of the producers, I think they went under too, right? Yeah. So it's a volatile business, but a good piece of work like this lasts. Another question?
Why did you choose Spanish-speaking actors? Are you directing it just for actors,
The question is, would it get a broader audience if the actors were performing in English?
Yeah.
Sure, thank you. Well, let's see, a couple things. One is, when I started to develop this project, in talking to film scholars and film historians, what I've learned is that in Mexican film history, there's never been a film that looks at the future. In South American film history, the same thing. In India, in the different cinemas of Africa, there's no future. The future as a kind of terrain only belongs to, or has been explored in the United States, in different countries of Europe, a little bit in Japan. But it's strange, because in Mexican film history, there's comedies, musicals, dramas, action. It's not that Mexico doesn't make films, they make a ton of films. But they don't make films about the future like we do here. In the US, we make about 15 futuristic films every year. They're always coming out. So why, that freaked me out. So I said, wait a second. The whole south of the planet, where the majority of people live, have no future on film. How? That doesn't seem right to me. So number one, that made me feel like even more so, I want to go in there and I want this film to look at the world from that point of view, the point of view of the South. And in this case, because the U.S. and Mexico is so interesting, to me, like U.S.-Mexico is almost a model for the world, the divisions that we have in this world, and the connections, divisions and connections. And so I wanted to set it U.S. and Mexico. And I wanted it to be kind of, to make a statement and to be different than the science fiction we're used to seeing. And for that reason, I thought, I don't think Spanish is fading away. As a matter of fact, Spanish is a language that's growing. So if I'm going to be honest with my audience, I think the future is going to be as much Spanish speaking as it is English. So I wanted to do it in Spanish.
But ask the question, do you think if it had been done in English, would you have more opportunity?
To me, going forward, I'm like, we're talking. I don't think this project's done yet. I'm going to keep working in this world. The ideas are very interesting to me. So maybe going forward, we'll do one that's maybe either more bilingual or maybe English. But this project needed to be in Spanish. It needed to be in the language that I think Mexico will speak and to be different from other science fiction films. I wanted it to say, you know what, man, the future belongs to all of us.
Well, Blade Runner, I know with Eddie Holmes, he said they had developed their own language for Blade Runner, where Eddie made up a language that he learned. It was a mixture of all, Pacific Rim languages, Spanish, and English. So he created his own language, and he kind of thought that was the future. And I think in a lot of ways, language evolves as two people, because, we say words that were, in the Spanish language, there's something like, I think it's over 1,200 of these are an amazing amount that are Moorish derivative words. They're Arabic words, garden, hati, all these other things. So all languages take from each other and reflect the history of the people and the land it's at.
In Blade Runner, that opening of Blade Runner, to me, it's like awe-inspiring and heartbreaking in a sense, because you see this world of Blade Runner, which is this wild, multicultural future that those of us who live in Southern California can see. That's where we're going. This is a place that is summarily Latino, very, very heavily Asian. Yes, there's Anglo folks, white folks, there's African American folks. This is a hyper multicultural and Latino space. And you see that in Blade Runner, and then it goes through, the camera goes through the crowd and finds Harrison Ford. Everyone else's background for the film. It's like, oh. So
He's eating noodles.
He's eating noodles, yeah. And Edward James almost looks amazing in that film. He's this futuristic Pachuco. He's incredible. And we watched the film, and he's
doing origami.
And he's doing origami. He's an incredible character, and I just wish he was the main character. So I think we need to have science fiction in which we're the main characters, because we are the future. And anyone who shows you something else is pretending. They're hiding the truth.
Well, the thought is that we came, named all the cities, and left. Named all the cities and all the streets, and we left. And I don't think that's the case. So you're definitely showing the world of the future. And look, Oxnard's the future. 70% Latino, huge Latino audience, all that. And it's multicultural, it's millennial, it's all these different things. and coming here to Oxnard College in this beautiful space to really talk about these issues. Is there another question?
The truth is, I grew up in upstate New York, and I met a guy named Pete Seeger. He happened to live there. Pete Seeger, he passed away recently at, I think, age 96. He was a musician, a folk musician, which now you think of like hippies, but when he started, it's almost like punk rock. He was a
Yeah, the village, guys in the village.
He was playing songs of
Bob
people
Dylan.
back in the 1920s and the 1930s. He was playing with striking coal miners in the 1950s. He was playing with the civil rights movement. Anyways, he's a musician who fused music and politics in a very beautiful way. He taught Dr. King the lyrics to We Shall Overcome. He kind of worked with him to rewrite it. So he has this incredible impact on history. A beautiful spirit. So I met him, and just by coincidence, by doing volunteer work in my community when I was a kid, and it kind of got me thinking about what would that be today? How could you provoke conversations and action around politics through making art? And so I tried painting and drawing and music, and I ended up with film as the synthesis of all of it.
Filmmakers get to take a canvas, but they use a lot of different paints. It can be music, it's visual. I was working with Bill Duke as a director just today, and he's like, it's motion pictures. Motion pictures. And it's kind of interesting. And it was like, sometimes you have to remember that, like stage acting and film acting, the difference is the close-up. It's all those little things, but it comes down to pretty simple things that are great. And you had a question back there. What's the biggest advice you have for people who want to get into film?
Yeah, I think it depends on what you want to do, but if you want to be like a filmmaker where you're writing and directing and that kind of thing, then to me it's about listen to yourself, know who you are with your friends, listen to how you talk with your friends, with your family. What is it that makes you excited and happy just in your everyday life? Because sometimes when we start to write, for example, we think, I'm going to write like Quentin Tarantino, or I'm going to write like George Lucas, and you got to write you. And the thing that makes you different is the thing that's going to make you strong. And it's a strange paradox that the thing that makes you different is what also makes you universal. And so for me, when I started off, because I was interested in politics, like I'm saying, or I was real serious and dry, and I did this work as an intellectual, but it didn't resonate with people. And it was when I realized, like, I like joking around with my friends. Yeah, I love politics, but I also like messing around and like having a devious laugh, And so then I started to do work that was more playful, And this film, even though it's got a kind of dark spirit in some ways, it's a playful film. The idea of a science fiction about the border is a playful idea, and that comes out of me admitting, hey, I love Star Wars. I'm going to say it, and I care about my family that's crossing the border, So it's like if I take those two things together, you get this, and it stands out. This film is, it's going to be around a long time, I think, because it stands out. So my advice is to stand out, be different, go into your weirdness, and write from there.
So the bar in Star Wars inspired the bar here.
Big time.
Big time.
I wish, yeah.
Well, I think Alex brings up a good point. If you really want to be an artist, Quentin Tarantino wasn't famous. He wasn't born famous. Most artists aren't born famous. And I was, speaking around the country recently, and someone said something about Hollywood, and I said, most people in Hollywood don't come from Hollywood. They come from somewhere else. That's like artists that are from Oxnard that work in Hollywood. Artists from San Diego that came up, and they come from somewhere, and that's what makes them special, because where they come from, they bring with them. And a lot of times in Hollywood, we look for people that don't have our story. Like you'll end up talking to a crab fisherman and be more fascinated by him than a cinematographer. But that story may end up being Wicked Tuna, or it might be something else, or that great film with George Clooney was about the guys who died in that ship. What's it called?
Perfect Storm.
Perfect Storm, yeah, Perfect Storm. Perfect Storm was such a beautifully done film They gave such dignity to fishermen, and when you think of it, one of the most dangerous industries in America is the fishing industry. So it's putting a spotlight on people that don't have voices necessarily. It gives them a voice, and that individuality makes that person become a star.
Thank you.
Another question, yeah.